took over the African Union's presidency, and we will have a visit together with our President Ursula von der Leyen there, because well, we have to promote sustainable development also in Africa. Coming back to home, or well, what we can do in the European Union, well, we do have a clear understanding that we can support some projects with our public financing. And we just agreed with the long-term funding at the EU level, and then to support the recovery, we also added recovery funds. So member states have to dedicate 37% of their expenditure to the climate-related projects. There are different work streams. Well, renovation is one of those, but of course lots of renewable projects, starting from offshore wind and solar, and of course hydrogen, which is a new attractive fuel for industry and transport. But we need private investments to achieve our targets. So in this regard, the taxonomy, well, EU taxonomy, should help us to guide private investors towards investments that we regard as sustainable. There was first act on taxonomy last year that covered all the renewables, and now just a week ago we proposed another delegated act that covers the fuels that we will need during transition. Among them there is natural gas and investments into nuclear.
Sometimes this town follows the conversation on the European taxonomy like it's a soap opera. You know, we're waiting for the new episode. You mentioned the new delegated act. Can I maybe get you to say a few more words about where we are? Is this the end of the conversation, that this is essentially the consensus, this is the agreement? Should we expect some more iterations to come? The language essentially was on nuclear and gas that sort of gave some very specific conditions under which those solutions could be sort of given the label. Is this the end, or should we be expecting more? Obviously, it's a never-ending sort of dialogue in Europe, but in terms of this particular act?
Well, this particular act should come into force from 1st of January 2023 if we will get support from member states and European Parliament. So they have a right either to reject or then support this act without any amendments. And the discussions will be heated because, well, nuclear is a topic where member states and politicians do have very different views. So we do have member states who have announced that they will close down nuclear power plants. We do have member states who have never built any nuclear power plants at all. And then we have member states who are right now planning the build-up of new reactors. So lots of discussions in this field, but based on our treaty, every member state can choose sovereignly their energy mix. And on natural gas, we will promote these investments which help us to phase out coal and replace it with natural gas. So switch from coal to gas actually cuts greenhouse gas emissions significantly. And this was a process that helped us to achieve our 2020 targets. Right now, gas is significantly more expensive than locally produced coal. But because in Europe carbon has a price, then overall this switch should continue to happen in the decade to come.
No, thank you for that. And I have to say, as someone who lives in Washington, observing the conversation, sometimes, it looks sometimes messy because democracy is messy, but I always appreciate the search for solution rather than letting the disagreement produce gridlock and no decision. So I appreciate that a lot. You've mentioned a few things that I hope we have time to come back on, but let me ask one more thing that was also in the statement yesterday of the Council, and that is the question of ensuring a just transition. And I saw that the wording in the statement yesterday also had sort of energy poverty there, which obviously is a topic that is much more acute today with energy prices. From the beginning, the EU Green Deal has had a focus on making sure that this is a just transition. Maybe let's start there. Where are you in that process? You've had a lot of initiatives in specific countries. You've also doing some work outside of the Union to help countries implement a just transition. And maybe as you walk us through the agenda, this country is also grappling with some very similar questions with environmental justice and just transition. So if you had a word or two about the transatlantic element of that collaboration, I think our audience would be very interested in that too.
Well, yes, we have a strong belief that this transition has to be fair, or it doesn't happen. And we promoted the approach that these regions who have worse starting position should be treated fairly. And already 2 years ago, we created just transition mechanism that gives extra support to regions that are until now dependent on fossil mining activities. And with this additional financing, we hope that we can replace these jobs that will be lost because of mining activity will cease to exist with clean jobs. We all know that renewables will create lots of new job opportunities, but unless we are delivering dedicated support to these regions, the new jobs might be created in absolutely different geographical locations. So we don't want to end up in the situation where people will lose their jobs and are forced to leave their neighborhood to find new jobs somewhere else. The same principle is important all across the globe. We do have similar just transition projects covering also Western Balkans and Ukraine. And now globally, the first big announcement was also made public during COP26 when several major several governments announced that they will dedicate more than 8 billion euros to the Just Transition Program in South Africa. So this is a country which is very dependent on coal mining and who are actually interested to promote clean alternatives. So I think that fairness is a principle that we have to honor in this regard.
No, thank you for saying that. And South Africa is also a country that we here at CSIS have studied extensively. And so when we saw that announcement at COP, I think it was very much in line with the type of international support that we hope to see for South Africa. You mentioned in passing carbon pricing, and we've seen, for anyone who's been in the energy sector for a while, European carbon prices spent about a decade at extremely low levels. They were just kind of there in the corner, and over the last sort of year plus, we've seen just an incredible increase in the carbon price in Europe. Is that something that worries you, or do you see that as part of a necessary component of the market functioning? And what should we expect on the future of carbon pricing? Obviously, it's one element of a much broader package for Europe in terms of the transition, but what should we be expecting in terms of like the next phases of the ETS and the carbon pricing system in Europe?
Well, when this system was created in Europe, then the negotiators also planned a emergency mechanism when price is increasing very rapidly. And that is happening right now. So I think that yesterday we witnessed another record high price level. And of course, several member states, especially the ones who are still using coal, are extremely worried because of this tendency, well, extending this carbon pricing to the buildings and transport sector is under negotiations right now. So we have to offer to the industry some predictability, but definitely this pricing scheme has been useful to guide industry towards cleaner solutions. And well, in the medium and long run, these regions who cover most of their energy consumption with clean alternatives will benefit. On carbon pricing, despite the fact that it has reached record high levels in Europe, it has not avoided the situation where during this heating season we do consume more coal to replace the missing gas flows. And this has been also one of the drivers that that is behind this high CO2 emission level, that industry has to buy additional quotas, because everybody knows that coal emits more CO2 than gas. But unfortunately, this is one of the results how our market reacts to the deficit that is there right now in the gas market.
No, thank you for that. We only have a few more minutes to go, but I wanted to see if I could get maybe just a few words on two sort of particular technologies that you've mentioned. If I could get a few more words out of you. One on hydrogen, particularly the sort of rules and codes and standards side of things, what the European Union is doing and how can collaboration with the United States be enhanced in that area. And the second technology is offshore wind. This administration has incredibly high ambitions for offshore wind, but the deployment has been much slower than in Europe. Where do you see areas for possible collaboration on offshore wind in terms of bringing some of the lessons from a region of the world like Europe that has deployed a lot of offshore wind? On the hydrogen side, a little bit more maybe on the standards and codes and technical requirements for this market.
I will actually return after 2 months, because we will have business-to-business event on offshore wind in New Jersey. So this is one of the technologies that we are really interested to promote from our perspective. Well, we are negotiating with our member states that they should achieve the level of 40% of energy consumption will be covered with renewables. And from where will we get to those renewables? Of course, there is also a problem for permitting in Europe. We see that that offshore wind has vast potential, and not only bottom fixed offshore, because we do have sea basins where we do have shallow coastal waters, but then we have Atlantic and we have Mediterranean, and there they could use alternative solutions like floating offshore, or there is lots of projects ongoing to get out of piloting phase on tidal and wave energy, and this is a interesting work stream where Europe still holds the global leadership, but we are really interested to share our best practices. And from our side, we will also guide our member states how to fasten the permitting procedures, because if we want to scale up the production of offshore wind parks, we have to fasten this procedure. And on hydrogen, this is not this is emerging market, and at the same time we do know that in Europe industry already needs hydrogen, but 98% of the hydrogen that we consume right now is grey hydrogen, so without any carbon capture, not coming from renewables via electrolysis. So we will promote renewable hydrogen, but to replace the grey hydrogen, the fossil hydrogen, we will also need so-called blue hydrogen. And to incentivize investments into this sector, we also propose that soon our industry and some modes of transport should use certain volumes of hydrogen to replace fossil fuels.
Well, thank you for those closing comments on hydrogen and offshore wind, two of the most exciting areas where things are happening in both Europe and the United States. We've come up to our time, and so I just wanted to thank you for being here at CSIS and having these conversations with us, but also, of course, thank you for your leadership. You know, when I think about what we need to do to meet our climate goals, the US-EU partnership is probably one of the most important in terms of meeting that very ambitious agenda. So thank you for all the work that you and your team do in helping us to get there. And with that, thank you very much for tuning in. Until next time.